like a schoolboy has to consult his father. And if you did something that was actually inspired by Krishna, which obviously it was, then Prabhupada would recognize that, and it was very enlivening, and it gave you a cause to expand more. Very important part of relating to Prabhupada was that freedom that he allowed his disciples to run with the ball. Of course, sometimes we fell on our face and lost the ball. But even that, Prabhupada would not make an ongoing case of it and badger you every time you saw it. It was dealt with, and that was it. And then you go on and continue. Once Prabhupada made a remark about the Christians. He said, why do the Christians always show Jesus on the cross? And somebody said, well, tried to give some explanation. Of course, it was insufficient. Prabhupada said, but if you love Jesus, if you love him, why do you picture him in his most humiliating and gruesome circumstance? If you love someone, would you put their picture on your mantle in his most embarrassing and gruesome? And when he said that, it was a world opened. So it was something so obvious and so really bizarre and perverse, but we never see it. But when Prabhupada commented on it, suddenly it took on a whole other perspective. And Prabhupada was doing that. He had a way of doing that again and again and again, in so many ways. At a GBC meeting, the habit of the GBC as the years rolled on was to become more and more absorbed in secondary and managerial issues. And they would go on for hours and days discussing and then writing up resolutions, papers of resolutions. So on this one occasion, they bring all these they bring the resolutions to Prabhupada for approval. Prabhupada looks at them and he flips through them casually. He says, but have you discussed how to improve the quality of chanting Hare Krishna? And we're thinking, but what is that's not important. So Prabhupada said at that time, he said that the GBC meeting should take 2 hours, 3, 4 at most. Of course, we were taking days upon days. Prabhupada was really concerned with the quality of our spiritual life, especially on the basis of chanting, because, in fact, Prabhupada once told me, he said, if a person does not chant Hare Krishna, then his devotional service becomes karma. In other words, his activities become karmic, because what's the difference between what we do and what they do? The difference is that it's treated or it's purified by the vibration which keeps us in touch. In India, sometimes Prabhupada, he would, when we're in a taxi or a car and stop somewhere, especially in places like Calcutta, and the beggars would come to the door, he would, if he didn't have, he would ask us to give them something. When we were hosted by some family, families all have servants, and when we were ready to go, Prabhupada would sit somewhere, and then he'd ask the proprietor to bring all the servants, and then in order of seniority, he would give them all some rupees. Those that were more senior got more, and those that were less, they got less. So Prabhupada was very, very concerned all around. He wasn't just up there and he couldn't relate or interact once I got a phone call. I was in Germany, and I said, "You got to come to Zurich right away." I said, "Why? What's going on?" "Prabhupada wants you to come right away." "We don't know. He just wants you, Bhagavan, and whatever, to come." "All right," so we go. And even when I arrived, still nobody knows. No one's telling me. In the middle of the night, maybe midnight, 1 o'clock, someone comes, "Prabhupada wants to see you and everyone." "Prabhupada," "Okay, we come in." And Prabhupada is like angry. How could you? He's talking to Bhagavan and Bali Mardan. What happened is that they had Shyam Sundar, but no, he's talking to Shyam Sundar and Bali Mardan. They had taken all the money, BBT money and whatever money they could get their hands on, and bought gold, because that was the year that Nixon deregulated the dollar, took it off the gold standard. And Shyam Sundar, wizard that he was, knew that it was going to really skyrocket, which it did. So Prabhupada was angry. How could you? How could you do that? You're gambling. And Shyam Sundar kept saying, "But Prabhupada, we made money, it went up." But Prabhupada said, "But it's our principle, it's gambling. You cannot break our principle." And he kept saying, "But we made money, we're making so." But Prabhupada said, "No, we cannot break our principle. Our principle is no gambling, and investing money in gold is gambling." So the next day, he marched into the bank and he sold all that gold off. Finished. He just wouldn't budge from that principle.
Shyam Sundar marched in the bank?
No, Prabhupada with Shyam Sundar, and that converted it all back into dollars. On the way down, I remember we were driving in a car, and Shyam Sundar apparently knew his way around, and Prabhupada noticed that because Shyam Sundar was pointing out different things. And so Prabhupada remarked that, "Oh, you know your way around." And Shyam Sundar went off. He said, "Oh yes, when I was 17, I left home and I went here and I went there and I traveled all over the world." And he was kind of giving a little resume of his adventures. Then when he had wound out, then there was a kind of silence. Then Prabhupada said, "I left home when I was 50. And the way he said it was just kind of put everything back in perspective. In the same vein, he was walking the Oxford Street, taking a walk, and then he stopped. He said, "You see, Krishna fulfills all desires." He said, "When I was a little boy, I always wanted to come to London, and now I'm in London. So Krishna fulfills all desires. It just may take a little time," he said. In Hawaii, at one point, someone had donated a restaurant, and Sudama was in charge in that area. But somehow or other, Sudama felt that the restaurant belonged to him. He wanted to claim it as his. So there was a meeting about that incident, and so Prabhupada said, "So, you're my disciple?" Sudama said, "Yes." "So whatever is given to you is meant for me?" Sudama said, "Yes." "So the restaurant, who does the restaurant belong to? Does it belong to you or does it belong to me?" Sudama said, "Belongs to me." So Prabhupada said, "Okay, take it and be happy." And he left the room. And when he left the room, then Prabhupada said, "So, what should we do? Should we prosecute?" And Guru Kripa, who was there, said, "Yeah." So Prabhupada kind of pondered on it. He said, "No." He said, "Then we become just like ordinary karmis." He said, "Our life is based on love and trust. And if we're not going to live that way, then we won't have a spiritual life." So he just let it go. Another thing about Prabhupada was that he would not conspire. When someone came to complain, He'd call that person, saying, okay, now what did you say? He wouldn't allow himself to be drawn into a conspiracy. He used to say, you can know, he called it fish. Then you go to a meeting and you speak out plainly. You can fight like cats and dogs at the meeting, but at the end, whatever you agreed to, that you have to carry that out. He wouldn't, and normally as a celebrity, a prominent person in the society, whether he's a politician or an entertainer, they have two lives. One that they show to the public, and another life that is completely contrary. Prabhupada wasn't like that. He had only one life.